My dad bought a 1964 single cab Volkswagen pickup truck, new, in Alabama. He drove it for years, went all over those county roads in Elmore County. He was a shop teacher, and he used it primarily to scavenge for lumber from fallen trees to use in his shop, and for a lot of other things. It was a unique vehicle in that part of the country. In fact, I don't ever remember anybody having one like it. A lot of stories related to it. I've told those stories before. My dad was an interesting character. Wanted to hold on, and I understood why. I wanted to hold on to that truck a long time after he was able to drive it, because it had memories for him. Time came when he let it go. It became my truck. And the experiences I had in taking that truck from Alabama to Nebraska, it would take an entire book to recount all of them, and I've told many of them. Got it back to Nebraska, had a lot of fun, and took a lot of time getting parts and getting it fixed and repaired. And the final part of owning that truck when we were in Nebraska was getting it titled. Alabama didn't title trucks before 1975, so I went through a long hassle with the Department of Motor Vehicles in Nebraska. Finally, with the help of a state senator, I got it titled and thought that taken care of it. Then we moved from Nebraska to Colorado. After we got settled, I went down to the DMV to get a registration, Colorado registration, and everything's fine, no problems, until the person checked the VIN, the identification number. And the number that I had on the registration, that I finally got from Nebraska, didn't match the one on the engine. And I had no idea what was going on. So they couldn't title it. I called Jane Dwyer, county clerk in Wetumpka, Alabama. And I had known about Jane, never met her, but she'd been the clerk there for 30, 40 years, I guess. And I said, Jane, this is my problem. I don't know what to do. And she said, well, let me see. She said, I remember that old truck. She said, I wonder, I think maybe your dad maybe he had two trucks, because I remember he had trouble with that first one and got a new one almost right away. I bet that's what happened. And I said, well, no. And he just never bothered to change the registration. I said, well, it sounds like Dad, but what am I going to do? And she said, well, you could just drive it, but that's probably not smart. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And so she worked it out. I'm trying to remember exactly how we did it, but she said, I'll tell you what, it has to be an Alabama registration, so I will issue you a temporary registration to my home address, because we had to have an Alabama address. And then you can take I'll send you the thing you put on the car, and then you can take that and take it in, and since you've got a temporary, then you can get a permanent. And that's the way we worked it. I don't understand it, but it worked. I did decide to, as I've said in another story I told, to take that truck back to Alabama. And I made sure when I did that Jane got a chance to see it. And I gave her the credit for allowing me to drive the truck. I had fun with it in Colorado. I wanted to redo their backyard, and I wanted to get some 300, 400, maybe 500-pound rocks and make a Japanese sand garden in the back. Went down to the rock yard and had them just put the rocks on the truck, and the bed of that truck is about waist high. And then I drove back into the backyard and took a board and prized it up and dropped the rocks. I can remember my wife saying, "I'm not sure that's exactly where we want the rocks." I said, "That's where they're going to stay." So I used the truck. Our son was home from college, I think. Maybe he was just getting ready to go to college. At any rate, we lived in the shadow of Mount Hermon, the front range of the Rocky Mountains. And I had been up on the mountain several times, hiking, walking up. So one afternoon, my wife and my son and I got in the truck, and I drove up to where the trailhead starts. We were at about 7,000 feet. The trailhead started at about 8,500, I guess. We parked the truck and we hiked up to the top of the mountain. Took a look at the view from there. And when we came back, got in the truck, I said, I don't know where this road goes. It goes on up farther than this, and I think let's see where it goes. Well, Lee was a little hesitant, but what could he say? So we got in the truck and we drove. Oh, did we drive. The road got steeper and steeper. We got to the hill. I wasn't sure that the old truck would even pull it, but we managed to get up the hill. Way after a while, it came out on Highway 24 over at Woodland Park, which is a long way from where we lived. And by this time it's getting cold. If those of you who are listening know anything about a Volkswagen heating system, you know that the heater was just the heat that came off the engine. But this time it was cold, the engine was in the rear, we weren't getting much heat. So we're cold, everybody's quiet, nobody's talking. And we stopped and got coffee and rode back into Colorado Springs and then back up I-25 to Monument where we were living. What was going to be just a couple of hours turned out to be several hours. And we got home, I said to Lee, well, it's a good day whenever you meet somebody new or you learn something. We didn't meet anybody, but have you learned anything? And he said, yeah, I've learned never to go anywhere in that truck with you again. And I understood, and he meant it. Drove the truck around. Time came when I realized that even though Dad had held onto that truck long after he could drive it, I needed to pass it on before I got to where I couldn't use it. And so I called my son, who's living in California, and I said, do you want the truck? And he said, oh, yes. And I said, well, tell you what, I'll bring it to you. I drove it over to overlooking the Garden of the Gods, where I spent and still do spend a lot of time reflecting on life. I parked the truck, got up on top of the cab, sat there and remembered and reflected. And then I drove it up to Pikes Peak, 14,110 feet. Not a bit of problem. It percolated right on up, past a couple of people whose engines were overheating. But an air-cooled engine kept on going. Took a picture of it at the top of Pikes Peak, drove it down and thought, well, it's time to take it to Mark. So I called him, told him I'd bring it to him. Left home one morning, drove north to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and that's where I-80 turned west. Well, did a lot of reflecting in that old truck, and this was one of those times I don't have a full set of teeth naturally. I had an old floppy hat that I wore, and I had decided to smoke my cigars while I drove the truck, remembering Dad. So here I am with a cigar in my mouth, my teeth were out, my old floppy hat on. And when I turned west, the wind hit me. It dropped my speed to about 45, 50 miles an hour. And the old truck started swaying. And that's when the trooper picked me up. She came up on the passenger side because I know she didn't have any idea what she was going to see. I didn't see her until I saw the lights and pulled over. And here I am looking at her, and she's checking the registration. I can't imagine what I looked like from her side of the fence. I asked her what the problem was, and she said, just not a problem, just wanted to check. I know she thought I was drunk. Just about the time she got ready to close it, she said, your registration is expired. And I said, what? Colorado has collector plates, and I thought what I had bought was good for 10 years. Turned out it was good for 5 years, and I was a couple of years over. So I took the ticket. For a while, I kept on driving. I thought, well, I'll just keep on going until I get the truck to Mark, and then he can take care of it. And then I realized I'm going to have to go through Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and into California. And I thought that's too much of a risk to take. If another Montana or Wyoming trooper stopped me, he might understand that I already had a ticket, but I couldn't trust the others, so I turned around and came home. Called my son, and I said, if you want the truck, you can come get it. He and a friend of his flew out. We took the truck over to the Garden of the Gods. We had a ceremony. I had gotten Dutch Master cigars for each one of us, and little wine glasses, and I filled them with buttermilk in memory of my dad. And so we toasted the truck and the experience and blessings for the trip with a glass of buttermilk and a Dutch Master cigar. And Mark and Mike took off. They got as far as Wendover, Utah on the 4th of July when the electrical system blew. But that's my son's truck. He'll have to tell it. The short of it is, he found somebody. By that time, he thought he was driving a piece of junk. He was ready to get rid of the whole thing. Until the mechanic that he found that agreed to work on it on the 4th of July called his brother who lived in California, who collects Volkswagens. And when his brother got on the phone with Mark, and Mark found out that this was a valuable relic his interest increased. Drove it home. He lives in the hills of Northern California. And found an old German mechanic who knows Volkswagens. And started to put it into shape again. I don't think he's done much with it. I think as I'm telling this story now, Dad's truck, which rested and rusted for about 15 years after he quit driving it, became my truck, which I had restored. Passed on to Mark, and I think, as I tell the story, that old truck is probably resting again in the hills of Northern California. But that's my son's story. The truck, as I've said many times before, was a treasure trove of memories. But it was also a metaphor. Because every time I got into it, or even now as I think about it, it gets me back in touch with the meaning of life. In this day and age where everything has to be done right now and has to have more power, it helps me to remember that life doesn't always have to be lived at a hectic pace. But if you take the time and reflect, you can pick up a lot of not only good stories, but just a lot of good, down-home meaning to life. Life is good. Don't know what'll happen to that old truck. That's Mark's business. But life is good. And it does me good to tell you the story. Thank you for listening.